The band Paramore has existed for nearly 2 decades. Spin magazine would refer to them as the self-professed 5 best friends from Nashville. But their history has been drama-filled, to say the least. It's like Guns N' Roses level of drama, minus the copious amounts of drugs and alcohol. The media, of course, has basked in all of it. That's seen hiatuses, several high-profile lineup changes, in addition to legal issues. On top of all that, the band has had its fair share of detractors who've accused them of being posers and a manufactured product of the record industry. Is it true? Well, today, let's take a look at the history of Paramore, and I want you guys to let me know your thoughts. Born in 1988 and a quiet child, frontwoman Hayley Williams was raised in the culturally conservative South in Meridian, Mississippi. Williams was born to a car audio specialist and a school teacher. Her parents would divorce and remarry several times, and one of her earliest childhood memories was of her parents arguing. She was just 4 years old at the time, but it was a memory that stayed with her for a lifetime, with her even blaming herself for her parents splitting up. The women in Hayley's family came from pretty rough backgrounds, with her admitting to the New Yorker, "My mom and a lot of the women on my mom's side went through a lot. There's a lot of history of domestic abuse and not good relationships. The women in my family, in my mind, they're so independent and so strong, but they went through hell." The women who would help her mom while she was going through a lot of hardships in her life were predominantly black, and at a young age, Hayley was exposed to a lot of African American history. Later on in her life, fronting Paramore, it wasn't uncommon for her to bring on stage black or Hispanic fans who had been long underrepresented in the pop punk and emo scene, and black rock fans have embraced the group. Hayley would have a strict Christian upbringing, so popular music that was played on radio and MTV didn't exactly come on her radar until she was older. Her early musical influences included singing in the church, in addition to listening to gospel music, as well as the Temptations, the Jackson 5, Motown, and Elvis. Then she discovered MTV and music magazines at her friend's house. Williams thought that the people she saw in those very music videos and magazines were happy, and she wanted to be just like them. She soon got exposed to more mainstream acts like No Doubt, Garbage, NSYNC, and pop punk groups like Blink-182. Hayley would even take part in talent competitions and even wrote songs for commercials in Meridian. But there weren't a lot of kids around her who were into creating and playing music, and she wanted to find other like-minded people to start a band with. She would tell the LA Times, "In retrospect, I can see clearly that I was looking for a family unit that I didn't have. I was angry about that for a long time." She would also tell MTV that she initially wanted to be a drummer and wasn't interested in being the center of attention. Following Hayley's parents divorcing in 2002, her mother soon remarried a staunch Baptist man who she later left. Hayley would refer to her stepfather as, and I quote, "a nightmare." She would recall to Fader, "I came home one day after school and my bags were packed." Hayley and her mom soon crashed at a friend's house, living in their double-wide trailer. By 2003, Hayley and her mother would escape her stepfather by moving to a suburb of Nashville called Franklin. A friend of Hayley's mom had moved there first, so they followed shortly afterwards. Franklin at the time was one of America's wealthiest counties. It's no surprise given that country superstars like Brad Paisley, Carrie Underwood, Keith Urban, and Sheryl Crow lived in the area. Hayley and her mother would crash at their friend's home or stayed motels and even lived in a trailer whose furnishings came from a local church. It was during this period of time Hayley would take vocal lessons from the same coach who worked with Taylor Swift and Keith Urban. But the kids at school made Hayley's life miserable, picking on her accent. According to Spin, she started being homeschooled and attended a supplemental weekly school program that included 90 or so kids. It was here that she met 2 brothers, guitarist Josh and drummer Zac Farro. She would tell ASLS, "They came up to me and basically said, 'Hey, you look like you love our style of music.' They were really outgoing and it was really easy to get along with them. Our friendships were really built on mixed CDs. Zac would bring me CDs with Jimmy Eat World, and it was a totally different side of music." The brothers had also grown up on artists like Elliott Smith, Radiohead, and Deftones. They would jam together, resulting in them writing their first song, a track called Conspiracy, something we'll talk about a little bit later. But they needed a bass player. Hayley's mother, upon moving to Franklin, encouraged her daughter to make some friends, and she soon found a flyer for a funk cover band who needed a vocalist. They would call themselves The Factory, and they featured future Paramore bassist Jeremy Davis. They played songs by the likes of Doobie Brothers, Stevie Wonder, and Chaka Khan. Hayley brought Davis to jam with the Farro brothers, and Davis was the eldest of the quartet, being 16. They also recruited a fifth member in rhythm guitarist Jason Bynum. Davis was initially a little apprehensive about the whole setup, as he was surprised to learn Zac Farro, the drummer, was only 14 at the time, admitting, "This is not going to work because the kid is way too young." But the first day of practice was amazing. I knew we were onto something. In addition to the bands I previously mentioned, Paramore would also take inspiration from Sunny Day Real Estate, Third Eye Blind, and Death Cab for Cutie. The band soon started playing school talent shows as well as local clubs. Then things could have went in a drastically different direction. Hayley would be discovered by a manager named Dave Stonebrick and producer Richard Williams. The pair had a company called Sponge Bath Records, and they signed Hayley to a 2-year production deal that saw her write pop songs with some of the best songwriters in Nashville. Hayley was just 16 at this point in time, and other labels were also introduced to her, but they wanted her to ditch the other guys in the band. At one point, Stonebrick asked Creed's manager Jeff Hansen to manage Hayley, which he initially did, but things wouldn't end up working out. Sponge Bath Records had contacts at Atlantic, and one of the contacts was an A&R rep named Steve Robertson, who got a CD containing 6 songs with the title Hayley Williams on it. He liked what he heard, and soon enough, that production deal that Sponge Bath had got bought out by Atlantic Records. Atlantic originally envisioned Hayley to be a solo act in the same vein as pop rock acts who were popular at the time. Think Kelly Clarkson and Avril Lavigne. Yet Hayley would push back, reportedly telling the label, "I don't want to be without a band. I'm more into alternative music. I don't see myself being the next Madonna." The label reluctantly agreed to her demands and thought that she was too young to really know what she wanted and that maybe she'd eventually come around. The very first song Paramore would write would be called Conspiracy. Hayley would tell an interviewer, "I wrote it about finally feeling like my dreams had come true, because all I wanted as a kid was to meet music people. Then the next thing I know, everyone wanted to draw me out of the band setting. Conspiracy was about my parents telling me that these great opportunities are coming to me and I might have to make sacrifices. And I was thinking, I just don't care if we ever play a show, as long as I can play music with my friends." That demo tape that Atlantic heard containing Hayley's solo songs would be re-recorded with the members of Paramore and included some of the band's compositions too. But Atlantic hated the songs and Hayley was on the verge of losing her recording contract. Then Paramore wrote and recorded 2 new songs which they submitted to the label, Hallelujah and Here We Go Again, and it seemed to appease the company. Paramore was soon sent to rehearse and write more songs in Florida ahead of recording their debut record. As for their name, Paramore came from the maiden name of one of the band members' moms, who spelled it Paramour, meaning secret lover. The next decision Atlantic had to make was how to market the band. They had a business relationship with the label Fueled by Ramen, which was distributed through Atlantic's parent company Warner. Fueled by Ramen shared a roster of similar artists to Paramore, including Jimmy Eat World and Fall Out Boy. The plan was to release Paramore's albums on the Fueled by Ramen label instead of Atlantic to lend more legitimacy to the band and not make it appear that there was a big label behind the group. Fueled by Ramen's head, a guy named John Janik, on the advice of Atlantic, would go see Paramore play at the Taste of Chaos Festival in Florida. He wasn't immediately taken with their music, but he saw there was something there, and in April of 2005, Paramore were now part of his roster of artists. Paramore would also be one of the first young artists to sign a new type of recording contract known as a 360 deal. These deals are structured in such a way that labels get a cut of everything the artist makes, including merch, ticket sales, and other earnings. In exchange, the artist gets more support from their label. In short, Atlantic looked at Paramore not so much as a band, but a brand. The deal also offered Hayley a 30% cut of the label's album profits, if any, which represented a big improvement from the typical industry royalty rate of 15%. With record sales being the primary source of income for labels and with less people paying for music by the mid-2000s, labels had to look for other ways to make money. Paramore would work with Dashboard Confessional and Yellowcard producer James Wisner and Mike Green on their debut album, All We Know Is Falling. Released in June of 2005, the album's main theme was one of heartbreak and disappointment. It was during the sessions bassist Jeremy Davis left the band for personal reasons, shocking his bandmates. Hayley would tell the Buffalo News, "We had all these plans, but Jeremy decided he needed to rethink about being in the band. He quit and we were left there without him. A lot of songs are sad because of that." The album's cover would represent his departure with a shadow on the couch. Fueled by Ramen's plans weren't to make Paramore an instant success on rock radio, despite the label thinking the song Pressure had potential. Instead, they opted to go in a much different direction, building their fan base through word of mouth and constant touring. They also built the band's online presence, most notably on websites like purevolume.com, where people could discover new music. Within its first few years of release, the record sold a respectable 150,000 copies. Paramore's debut disc, which is considered pop punk, would win high praise from both Spin magazine and the New York Times. However, nearly a decade later, thanks to the band's huge popularity, the album eventually went gold. According to Spin magazine's 2010 profile on the group, Paramore was originally marketed as a Christian band, even playing some Christian festivals like Purple Door and Cornerstone. But the members of Paramore soon realized they weren't perfect enough to be marketed in such a way. Guitarist Josh Farro would tell Spin, "When you do Christian music, you get put on a pedestal, and if you do anything wrong, like dye your hair the wrong color, it's a sin." Paramore soon hit the Warped Tour, and since they were underage, they had to be joined by their parents on the road. Instead of relying on alcohol, the band would be fueled by ramen, Starbucks, Burger King, and Sonic. Their label would pay many of the band's touring expenses on the road, including buying a van and paying for the band members to keep pursuing their high school educations. Hayley would tell the New York Times, "We were given all the time in the world and all the support we could ever ask for to basically do nothing but play shows." Despite the band's support from their label, they didn't initially have a touring manager, so Hayley's father would be the tour bus driver and manager of the group. Playing their first ever Warped Tour, Paramore would be relegated to the smaller Shira Girl stage. It was such an afterthought for the Warped Tour that the band members themselves would have to do their own setup and takedown of the stage and equipment. Fueled by Ramen founder John Janik would later admit to the Index Journal newspaper that Paramore was never paid for their 2005 appearance on the Warped Tour. Instead, the idea was to tour and work on their live shows and build a fan base. The band also became notable for being accessible to their fans, writing to them on the band's website through a live journal blog, and meeting them at shows. But getting fans early on proved to be difficult at times. Paramore would write their name and their set times on pieces of paper, which they then handed out to Warped Tour attendees. Some people would crumple up those pieces of paper and throw them back at the members of the band. Meanwhile, punk gatekeepers would write Hayley Williams off as sexual fodder, with her telling the LA Times, "It wasn't cool to be feminine back then. I put a damper on that for my own confidence because it was hard to go into a male-dominated space, not even as a woman, but as a little girl." It would result in Hayley admitting to the Anderson Independent Mail newspaper that during the band's early days, she wanted to simply blend in with the boys and not be singled out so much. She wouldn't even wear makeup or put on chapstick, and she would remark how some photographers shooting the band remarked how she looked like a 13-year-old boy. Paramore would spend 2006 on the road and do his second stint on the Warped Tour, moving on to the Volcom and Hurley stages. On the bright side, this time around the stage was actually assembled by a crew and not the band's drummer. It was during this period on the road that Paramore also started writing and assembling songs for their second record. Playing the higher profile stages on the Warped Tour saw Paramore generate a good deal of buzz. It was prior to recording their second album, Riot, that guitarist Hunter Lamb, who replaced Jason Bynum, and old friend and bandmate of the Farro brothers Taylor York took a spot on tour. At the insistence of Hayley, bassist Jeremy Davis rejoined the group once again, and the band set out to record their second record, 2007's Riot. But Davis soon left again, with the band having issues with his work ethic and his substance abuse. While Taylor York wouldn't play on the record, he is thanked in the liner notes and co-wrote the song That's What You Get, and he joined as a touring member, and Davis soon rejoined the group too. Paramore would have the luxury of time on their side. Riot would be recorded over a 3-month period, while their previous album was done in 3 weeks. Atlantic even pushed the band to work with outside songwriters, but by this point, The band was such a tight unit that working with outside people didn't work. Riot would be released in June of 2007. As for the record's name, Josh would tell the Baltimore Sun, "We went with the title Riot because what we found was a controlled outburst of emotion, and we felt that went with Hayley's lyrical format. Her lyrics are very honest about everyday relationships. They're deeper than what was on the first album." There really wasn't any early indication that the record would be a smash success. The first week sales saw it debut at number 20 on the Billboard album chart, with it selling around 44,000 copies, a respectable debut, but a far cry from becoming any kind of massive success. But the band's incessant touring started to pay off, and MTV added the band's music to their network. Paramore appeared on the Warped Tour for the third year in a row, landing a spot on the main stage. Fast forward to the fall of 2007, and the band had 2 singles on the Hot 100 chart with Misery Business and Crush Crush Crush. The album soon started its steady climb up the Billboard 200 chart, and Misery Business alone would be downloaded nearly 2 million times, with Crush 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 not being far behind. James Montgomery, who was working at MTV as a rock editor, would tell the Index Journal, "There were a lot of similar sounding bands getting big at the time like Panic at the Disco and My Chemical Romance, but they were male fronted. When Paramore first came up, people were saying, 'You have to see this girl with the bright red hair. She's a firecracker.'" The band would soon amass a legion of young fans, and it was through a savvy internet marketing campaign, relentless touring, and by word of mouth, the band's second album would sell over 10 times the amount of copies as their debut disc. Riot would peak at number 15 on the album charts and go triple platinum in America. Josh Farro would tell the Springfield News Leader another reason that Paramore was so successful was that Hayley Williams' lyrics were relatable, saying, "Hayley writes most of the lyrics and it's based on real-life experiences. We've all experienced divorce, breakups, and heartbreak. Since all our fans are about the same age, they can relate to us." Paramore would soon be labeled as the next big thing. Even in the UK, their single Misery Business debuted ahead of established pop and rock acts like Fergie and Paul McCartney. The single Misery Business, one of the band's biggest tracks, would be written by Hayley, who would recall the song's origin, stating, "When I was 13 or 14 and I had a crush on Josh, but he didn't like me back. He would go hang out with his girlfriend, who I wrote Misery Business about because I was a dick." It had been long rumored that from the inception of the band until late 2007, the guitarist and Hayley were dating, and it would turn out to be true. The song would later become shunned by Paramore, with Hayley citing how she didn't want to promote pitting women against one another and how she didn't relate to the song anymore. She was now focused on building relationships with women. The band would stop playing Misery Business in 2018, but in 2022 they played the song again after a 4-year hiatus. Pop star Olivia Rodrigo's song Good For You was apparently influenced by Misery Business, and Paramore received a belated songwriting credit on the track. With Riot, Paramore was winning over some celebrity fans too, with John Mayer blogging about the band on his website, calling Hayley Williams, and I quote, "the great Orange Hope," while also finding a fan in E Street Band and Conan O'Brien bandleader Max Weinberg. Weinberg would witness one of the Warped Tour performances that Paramore had done, and managed to get them a spot on Conan O'Brien's late night show when he was on NBC. As Paramore rolled into 2008, they had a lot to celebrate, selling millions of records, getting a Grammy nomination for Best New Artist, as well as 2 Teen Choice Awards, and some publications showering them with praise. Paramore even contributed 2 tracks to the massive teen movie Twilight, including the song Decode. Paramore ended up on the soundtrack after Fueled by Ramen head John Janik gave Hayley the books on which the movie is based. Within a week, she called Janik saying that she wanted to have the band on the soundtrack. Before the band and the label knew it, the song Decode was charting on iTunes, selling around 1 million copies, and the soundtrack for the film also went platinum, only further raising the band's profile. Paramore would admit to the Oakland Tribune that once they appeared on the Twilight soundtrack, their fan base grew, telling the publication that more moms were coming to their shows, or as they refer to them as, Twilight Moms. Also in 2008, Guitar Hero World Tour was released, which featured Misery Business as an on-disc track, and Hayley even appeared in the game as a playable avatar. Couple this with Rock Band 2 coming out the same year, and featuring That's What You Get as an on-disc song, not to mention Crush 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 being released as DLC earlier in the year, and the band was inescapable. Oh, did I mention that NHL 2008 also featured Misery Business on its soundtrack, and The Sims 2 featured the song Pressure from their first album. But with any band that blows up, they also got a lot of backlash, with some slamming Paramore for being sugary posers, with Hayley telling the record newspaper, "We obviously came off on the circuit as a top band. We're on radio, we've had videos on MTV, there's a chick in the band, we're all young, it can be a gimmick. But I think when people decide to take a closer look, I think we're a little more than red hair of the age, the radio play. I like to believe there's something more there." Some critics also criticized Paramore for not straying too far from their pop-punk sound on Riot. The independent newspaper meanwhile speculated that the band members being open about their religious beliefs and Hayley's close friendship with pop star Katy Perry was ruining their credibility. The paper would write, "As often happens when alternative girls become mainstream idols, people like to yell fraud. Some critics have dismissed her as some kind of faux rock chick, in the same vein as Kelly Clarkson or Avril Lavigne. Others pointed to the band's Christian faith and their lack of interest in partying." At the same time, the paper defended Hayley, claiming she didn't live up to the media's expectations of a woman in the music industry since she was living a clean life, she was fierce, strong, independent, and wasn't part of some high-profile power couple. The British press would also cite Hayley's lack of polish compared to more mainstream pop princesses as being responsible for the band's success because she was able to connect with young females. She looked normal, her wardrobe consisted of t-shirts and jeans and not dresses. Girls were soon mimicking her hairstyle and clothing. In 2007 saw Hayley even nominated by Alternative Press magazine for Best Female Vocalist and the Female Rocker with the Most Style. She was even voted number 2 as Sexiest Female in Kerrang magazine, while Paramore were also voted Best New Rock Band in many publications. Despite Paramore's popularity being on the upswing, 2008 would end up being one of Hayley's worst years of her life. She would recall to the New York Times how she even refused to move into any house that had the numbers 2, 0, or 8 in them. The band would cancel a string of European tour dates, putting out a statement about how internal problems in the group led to the band going back home to work on their personal problems. Paramore also, of course, wasn't happy with their treatment in the press, with Hayley being singled out. So much so that the band donned t-shirts for their UK shows that read "Paramore is a band." It was perhaps a nod to the shirts that Blondie wore on stage that read "Blondie is a group." Hayley would tell the LA Times, "90% of the articles about us start something with my size or my hair." It wasn't just the press focusing on superficialities, but the fan forums as well. Spin magazine's profile on the band in 2010 would state, "Among their fans, Paramore are scrutinized as any TMZ paparazzi bait. Hayley's engaged, pregnant, a homewrecker, Taylor is gay, Josh and Hayley are still in love, Josh is leaving the band." Josh and Hayley soon ended their romantic relationship, and each member had different ideas of where sonically the band should go. Couple this with the constant scrutiny in the press and rumors, and the Farro brothers nearly quit the band. Despite persistent rumors in the press about the band breaking up, they kept it together, at least for the time being. Hayley would tell the LA Times, "We're all human and we just love to hurt each other. After seeing how relationships work, how do you trust somebody who's just as flawed as you are? It's kind of embarrassing because so much of me is in these songs, but that's what's beautiful about it. I'm growing up." The difficult past year resulted in the band taking a closer look at one another, realizing and accepting that everyone changes. Jeremy Davis would tell the Oakland Tribune, "Even if your friend changes, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing." That's where we got the record title. We had to look at each other with brand new eyes. Paramore's third album saw the group explore more sounds, straying a little further away from their traditional pop-punk roots. Paramore would claim that the breakup track Ignorance would bridge the gap between Riot and their new album at the time, and it would be released as the first single. The track's lyrical content, which cut deep, saw some comparisons to John Lennon's song How Do You Sleep? How did Hayley's bandmates feel about being the subject of her lyrical barbs? Well, Josh would tell the LA Times, "Sweet, every song is going to be about us. We don't get to sing Hayley's such a jerk, but it's cool because we trust Hayley to make it more than just our band." The record would also contain the top 40 hit ballad, The Only Exception, which draws on Hayley's experience of seeing her parents' marriage dissolve. 2009 saw Paramore open for a newly reunited No Doubt on the road, a band that Hayley grew up idolizing. In interviews for the record, Hayley would claim Brand New Eyes, and I quote, saved the band. Another element that was said to have saved the band was their Christian faith, with Hayley admitting, "We don't want to preach. I'm not singing songs about God and my relationship with God. I'm singing about real life, but Christianity is a part of us and it's very real." Brand New Eyes would knock Madonna off the #1 spot in the UK, according to the Independent newspaper. Older folks in the music press had long ignored Paramore in the UK, but that was about to change. They soon sold out Wembley Arena, and back in America, the album would debut at #2, going platinum. However, 2010 proved to be another tumultuous year for Paramore, as both of the Farro brothers quit. It resulted in a nasty war of words in the press, and Josh would release a statement that Paramore was, and I quote, a manufactured product of a major label, and accused Hayley of being manipulated by her management, her parents, and her record label, and treating her band as merely a solo project. He would reveal that Williams was the only member of the band signed to Atlantic Records, shocking many fans. The statement would go on to add that despite assurances from Hayley in the press that Brand New Eyes saved the band, it was quite the opposite, and the band was only drifting further apart. Zac would later issue his own statement, putting rumors to bed that he left the group because of his brother. He also claimed his brother had some regret about the blog post he published, and Paramore meanwhile would respond with a statement claiming that they weren't really surprised about the announcement, since the brothers seemed like they didn't really want to be in the band anymore. Paramore would take 4 years between records, their longest break to date. Hayley would tell the Baltimore Sun that the time apart allowed the members to grow as a unit and individually, revealing, "I learned how to cook. I redecorated my house. I spent time being a normal 23, 24-year-old woman, and that was huge. Waking up every morning to have the freedom and this feeling like today I want to write a song rather than I have to write a song. I think we all needed that space. We've been fully recharged." As Paramore embarked on their 4th record, they soon became a trio, with Hayley wanting to prove that the band could exist and succeed without the Farro brothers. Their 4th record would represent a sort of rebirth and reintroduction for the band, hence why it was self-titled. But Hayley would admit to the Boston Globe that Brand New Eyes could have been the band's last record, as following the Farro brothers' exit, she contemplated ending the group. But it would be a chance encounter with bandmate Taylor York at a concert in Nashville, where both musicians afterwards agreed to go for coffee and talk about what was going on. York would admit to Williams that he wasn't done with the band just yet, and he wanted to continue on. This discussion would convince Hayley that Paramore wasn't done. The band would make use of both studio and touring musicians to round out their lineup for the time being. Paramore's 4th record would include new sounds like ukulele interludes and gospel choirs, in addition to new wave and funk sounds. With a leaner lineup, Paramore also changed the way that they wrote songs. York, who was good with computers, would build songs from ideas that himself and Hayley had, coming up with guitar lines and beats. The first song the band demoed was a track called Proof, a love tune about wanting to get as far away from the situation as possible. Another song written during their previous tour was a track called Still Into You, but Hayley was unsure about the song. It didn't sound like Paramore to her, but at the insistence of her bandmate Taylor, she recorded the song with her original lyrics. Still Into You would prove to be one of Paramore's biggest hits, peaking at number 24 on the Hot 100 charts. Their self-titled album proved to be quite the rebirth, as the record debuted at the #1 spot on the charts, giving them their first #1 album. The single Ain't It Fun was also another big hit, nabbing a Grammy nomination. The band would also headline Madison Square Garden for the first time in their career, but within a few years, gray skies were on the horizon. In 2015, Paramore would announce that longtime bassist Jeremy Davis had left the band once again. Soon enough, Davis and his ex-bandmates were locked in a legal dispute over how he was compensated during his time in the band. Davis would file a lawsuit against Paramore, claiming that himself and Williams were partners in the business entity that operated the band. Therefore, he alleged he was owed royalties, touring revenue, and other income, and referred to Hayley as backstabbing. But documents from the lawsuit listed Williams as the sole owner of the business entity and claimed that Davis was simply an employee of the partnership. The legal dispute was eventually settled in 2017. The track Tell Me How on their follow-up record would document their split. Hayley would tell the New York Times, "We were down another member, same old story, almost from day one. It made me question everything. Am I doing something wrong? You read things that people say about you, and eventually you just think, oh, I must be some kind of diva. I know that's not me, but it caused a lot of self-doubt." It was the same year Williams put her engagement on hold to guitarist Chad Gilbert. They would tie the knot in 2016, but their marriage ended the following year. She would tell the New York Times, "Betrayal and crazy led to the divorce." It was also around the time that she was planning to get married that Hayley contemplated quitting music altogether, even going to Atlantic to see if she could renegotiate her contract so she would have to deliver less music. But it would be a contact at her label who said that she didn't have to choose between her personal life and her career. She would tell Refinery 29, "I thought, there's got to be something else that I'm good at in my life. Maybe it's time for me to go find that." Hayley would soon be diagnosed as having depression and post-traumatic stress syndrome. She quietly quit Paramore in 2015 and spent a lot of her days sitting in bed watching old episodes of The Office. She'd eventually go to a treatment clinic and find a good therapist. York, meanwhile, would tell The New Yorker that he developed symptoms of acute anxiety, and York and Williams soon felt overwhelmed by the commitments they had made on their past tour. After Hayley left Paramore, York sent her some song ideas, and suddenly things didn't look over for the band. Amidst all the chaos and turmoil, there was a bright spot in 2016 when founding member and drummer Zac Farro rejoined the group. In the years since Zac left, Hayley and the drummer reconnected after exchanging messages with one another after he relocated to New Zealand. He would play on the band's subsequent record 2017's After Laughter. The album would be a departure from their past sound, drawing a lot of comparisons to 70s and 80s music, taking inspiration from groups like Talking Heads, Cyndi Lauper, and Blondie, while tackling themes of anxiety and depression. The album garnered positive reviews and would peak at number 6 on the charts, going gold. Hayley would remark at the time, "We've gotten to a point with our new music where we really don't want to headbang anymore." The touring cycle for After Laughter would end in 2018, and the band took the longest break of their career. Cut to 2020, and the pandemic happens. The trio would spend their downtime in Nashville talking about life during a once-in-a-lifetime event, coupled with racial tensions in America, and reflecting on their own upbringings in the South. These conversations would form the basis for their latest album, 2023's This Is Why, a record that was rooted in post and an art punk sound. The album would debut at number 2 on the charts. It's been confirmed by both Hayley and Taylor that they are now a couple. Meanwhile, their old bandmate Josh Farro was in the news again after some old social media posts came to light, which contained homophobic writings. Hayley would tweet out in October of 2020, "There's a reason there are only 3 people left in Paramore. Surprise haters, it ain't 'cause of me." Then last December, the band's social media was wiped clean, and their website went offline, leading to speculation that Paramore was perhaps breaking up. Over the last couple weeks, though, it's come out that their contract with Atlantic Records is expired, and the band are now free agents. It's also been reported that Paramore will be contributing a track to an upcoming Talking Heads tribute album. It's rare for a band who's gone through so much turmoil and lineup changes to still stay relevant after all these years, and Paramore has succeeded in doing that. Today, major pop stars including Youngblood, Olivia Rodrigo, and Demi Lovato have cited Paramore as an influence. As for Hayley's mother, she would end up moving to Los Angeles and becoming a life coach for up-and-coming Disney stars. That concludes today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. We're doing something a little more recent on my channel. And let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. And as always, if you have suggestions for future topics you'd like to see me cover, use the link in the description box below. And we'll see you again on Rock and Roll True Stories. Take care.